Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Well, one of my best drinking buddies right here, a man with one of the worst hair pieces I've ever seen. Nick Gillespie from Reason. Good to have you.
Yes, from your head to my brow.
Yeah, well, you know,
so.
I mean, really, that thing, does it screw off or does it unsnap in the back?
It wears off after a couple of weeks, and then I got to get a new one.
Yeah, so, I can understand that. Tell me, Reason TV has just been really taken off, and, if you haven't seen Reason TV, it's reason.tv
or reason.com,
and which has been terrific for those of us who are illiterate. I know you also know how to write,
right,
but that doesn't interest me. The idea of taking free market libertarian stories and making them visual and talking about them, it's really taken off.
It's helpful. I mean, it adds a whole dimension to things, and we've seen I mean, first off, you can be funny. Or you can be really serious. And we've done a series of videos about police brutality and kind of law enforcement gone wrong, which have there's no way to convey that power simply through the word. Having the images there and having the testimony of fathers of, there were a series of homeless people basically who were tased to death in Southern California. And it's symptomatic of a larger problem in that part of the country, but having the fathers of these kids talk on camera, it's immensely powerful, but also just showing, kind of showing, not telling works. We have a new piece out today about Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is ground zero for municipal problems. I mean, it is just a total black hole that is, that might be where the country starts getting sucked down into the depths of hell from, but talking to people, seeing what Harrisburg has become over 30 years of a megalomaniacal mayor who did everything, including tried to build a museum of the frontier in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, big saloon town, right? Bought a major minor league baseball team, did this, did that, upgraded a trash incinerator so that it could literally burn, 3 or 4 times as much money of the taxpayers as possible. These things are much more vibrant when you're, when you're seeing images.
But everybody who watches Reason TV really comes back with one basic and overriding question, which is, what's with a leather jacket?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have several of these and you rotate them? Well, do you have a formal one for weddings and funerals?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's kind of like, I guess it was Spider-Man 3 where the costume took over Spider-Man. Yeah. And I mean, I swear to God, I take this off every night. I throw it in the garbage. Sometimes I put it in a trash compactor and an incinerator, and I wake up the next morning and I'm wearing it.
Talk to me a little bit about the book, Declaration of Independence. Get it with a little T there, which is a must-buy. Go to reason.org or Amazon or
just Barnes & Noble, CNN, Borders.
If you buy enough of these, he can buy a real jacket. The libertarian movement, for lack of a better term, you seem to think it's growing, that people are getting it. Talk to me about that.
Well, the basis of the book is that, first off, just as a matter of course, my co-author, Matt Welch, I edit the web stuff at Reason. He edits the print magazine. But it started by talking about, or observing over the past couple of years that independents, political independents, are basically constantly at all-time highs. More and more people
These are people who are unaffiliated. They're not. They're RRD.
And they are evacuating the Republicans and Democrats in record numbers. Gallup just released about a month ago a poll saying 40% of the electorate is independent. But so that's the starting point. Why are people leaving, the two big teams? That's odd. But then taking that insight and kind of noodling on that, and then also realizing that what's happened over about the past 30 or 40 years in American society is that in every part of our lives, with the exception of politics, in our business lives, in our cultural lives, in our social lives, our personal lives, we're able to personalize and customize more and more aspects of our existence, but you can't do that in politics, and there's a really weird and interesting disjuncture. And what we argue in the book, and this is kind of proto-libertarian, it's not per se libertarian, but that what people are starting to demand, politics is a lagging indicator. It's it's the last guy in the room to get the joke. But it's a lagging indicator of where American society is. And we are getting to a point now where we're going to start demanding a smaller, more customized political world that does our bidding rather than makes us do their bidding. So it's the trail, it's the final end of a kind of lifestyle, economic, social revolution that's going to happen.
Let's just go into it because you're absolutely wrong on all that.
I'm more than willing to accept that.
First of all, I hate the term independent. It's one of my pet peeves. And that they're not independent. They're not members of the independent party. There's the Independent Reform Party. It's in most states. They ain't members of that. And so I get these callers on radio that say, well, I don't play that RD game. I'm an independent.
Right.
And I say, you're not an independent. You're a moron. You're an unaffiliated. You're not affiliated, but unaffiliateds of independence or direct.
Well, here, let me see if I can climb out of the idiot hole that you put me in. And I'm not sure that I can. I'm probably going to, you throw me a rope in a couple minutes here if I don't. But part of what we're talking about here is that just as people are less likely to think of themselves as, say Chevrolet owners or even Toyota owners or whatever, people are less willing to just accept, okay, I grew up in a particular tribe or in a particular way. That's my identity and I'm sticking with it no matter what. People are willing to say, in a way that they were not 40 years ago, I refuse to say I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, I'm something else. The way that this plays out, or the power that we talk about independence in politics now, is single issue advocacy. And the Tea Party is one of the developments, and really in a lot of ways one of the heroes of the book, because the Tea Party is clearly leans Republican, okay? Culturally, sociologically, politically, ideologically, they're kind of on the Republican side. But what they did in 2010, and I hope to hell they do it in 2012, is they said to the Republican Party, take a state like Delaware or Nevada, we will nominate in safe places, like, in Delaware, where a Republican, a clown with an R after his name could have gotten, Hitler, as long as there was an R at the end, was going to win a Senate seat. And the Tea Party in Delaware said, you know what, we're going to nominate a crazy person because the R that you put up there is not going to actually stop spending. And that, this is something new, and that once you break away from those tribal things of saying like, well, I'm a Republican, so that means because I want lower taxes and I want less government invasion in my life, I also have to sign on with being anti-immigrant and being anti-abortion and a flag-burning amendment.
But you don't have to sign on to that. And let me take it on this way, that in Colorado, the party affiliation is about thirds.
Right.
Third R, third D, and third unaffiliated, not independent. But we have a pretty good primary system that we have caucuses, and then we have assemblies, and then we have the primary. So we have these internal fights to decide who's going to be on the final ballot. Right. And you can't play that game unless you are registered with an R or a D. And because of that, what I would love to see, more libertarian-oriented, free market people who are unaffiliated and smugly calling themselves independents at cocktail parties to infiltrate the Republican Party and bring it back to Republican Party principles. And you do that by making sure your guy wins in the primary and not their guy. You can't do that if you're not an R or a D.
You know what? Let me suggest that we are. This is the 21st century. God help us all. For the first 6 years of that, we had, at the national level, we had a fully Republican government, and it was such a disaster that it gave rise to a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president. So I'm not interested in playing a game of saying, you know what, we got to pull the Republican Party back to what, George Bush? This is like, it's not working. And even somebody like Ronald Reagan kicked out the JAMS MFO on debt spending, on stupid defense spending, things like that.
So we'll argue about that because Congress was in both houses. So let's.
Well, for part of it, it was also Republican. But what I'm saying is that
the House never was.
The power. Yes, that's right. The Senate was under Reagan briefly was Republican majority. But the point is that as somebody, I've got a couple kids. I hope I have a future. I'm getting the sense that I may not even make it through the end of the show. But what I want to see is a government that does less, that costs less and does less, and then focuses on a few things and does them at least half-assedly well. And we're not going to get that through Republican Party politics as usual. They have to be punished, not the country.
Understanding Caldara's political axiom number one, there's nothing that Republicans can't screw up.
Right.
And I is a Republican, so I can say so. But there was a beautiful moment in George Bush's administration. We were all holding on because he was going to give us a great Supreme Court. And so he gives us these remarkable earmarks. He spends more and government grows faster than when LBJ was president. We have all sorts of pork-laden earmarks. We have the Ag Bill. We had the largest increase in the entitlement state with the Medicare.
Right.
And then to top it off, my favorite, he outlawed the incandescent light bulb, Edison's greatest invention.
That's right.
But he was going to give us a great court. And then finally the day came, and the great court was going to come. And the announcement came down from on high, and it was Harriet, who the hell is she, Myers?
Yes, that's
Here's the beautiful moment, though. That was when, I believe that moment was the beginning of the Tea Party, in that without any organization, without any communication, all these groups, from yours to mine to Citizens, didn't say no. They said hell no.
Right.
And arguably, I think we've got two of the finest Supreme Court justices in decades out of that president. And it was because finally people realized we have to keep an eye on our Republicans. Otherwise, they are worse than Democrats when it comes to spending.
Yeah, well,
and that, for me, is the happy part.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and this is probably a source of serious disagreement, but the Supreme Court is the least important branch of government. Because the Supreme Court isn't the one writing the budget, it isn't the one collecting the taxes, it isn't doing any of that. And as a matter of fact, when you look at a variety of conservatives, somebody like Antonin Scalia, who is the ultimate situational federalist, if he likes the results, he's a strong federalist. If he doesn't, then all of a sudden he's in favor of a strong central government. You know, we can deal with the Supreme Court in other ways. But what libertarians, I think, and these, you know, we are people who want a smaller government and we want to have more freedom. And what we need to do.
Let me get this out. You missed my point about that great Harriet Myers moment. Forget that it was the Supreme Court. It was a moment when Republicans, who usually go wake up, help people get elected, and once they're elected, go, I'm out of here. It's when conservatives woke up and said, wait a second. We have to watch them closely, otherwise.
Then where were they? I agree.
And
that,
that's a point of optimism for me. And we now, I think, have to have a different operating procedure when it comes to Republicans. That Republicans are politicians too, and sometimes even worse. And should, God forbid, in your world, Republicans get control of Congress and the president's office, good things can happen if we don't let up on them.
I am fond of saying that the tragic comedy of American life is that we get the government we deserve. So it is within the citizenry, it's within the electorate's power to reduce the size and scope of government. We have not done what we need to do, and I do think that the Tea Party and other single issue moments are worth thinking about that, whether it's the gathering marijuana legalization movement, whether the online kind of spontaneous attack against the Stop Online Piracy Act, which is kind of brilliant and was a swarm, an online swarm that took it to politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, who wanted to really put handcuffs on the internet at the behest of large entertainment corporations. But what I'm saying is that as long as you tell the Republicans, especially if you're this odd subset, this weird mutation called libertarians, where you actually believe what the Republican Party says it stands for, we cannot afford to be taken for granted by them anymore, and we have consistently been all the time. We are treated like we're the Fredo Corleone of the Republican Party, where it's like, you get shoved off into the corner, you get sent out.
What do you expect they're going to think of you?
But what I'm saying is that this, in a lot of ways, we need more people like Rand Paul. We need more people like Mike Lee. We need more people like Ron Paul. We need to replace him because he's retiring. We need fewer people like Mitch McConnell and John Boehner, who, before the 2010 elections, went on the record of saying we're not going to cut any spending. And Boehner's big message to America, he didn't cut anything in his big plan about how he was going to cut government. So we may be disagreeing more. I don't think we're disagreeing about ends, but we are disagreeing about means. And I think
then help me
the
understand.
Power of independence, of not being affiliated, it's time for the Republican Party, who, according to Gallup, it's down to 27% of people in America say are willing to admit publicly that they're a Republican. They need my help a lot more than I need theirs, because I'm already getting screwed by them. If they want to get back into power, they have to court me, and they have to tell me what's the first $1 trillion of spending you're going to cut, and remind me again how Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich is going to be any worse than Barack Obama. Because it's we know that Barack Obama was marginally worse than George Bush, but
I would say he is head and shoulders worse. I would compare Bush and then into Obama as Hoover into FDR. That they both point in the right direction, but one
I think it's underestimating. Bush was in there for 8 years of true disaster capitalism.
Let's talk about the method of what you see. Now, I understand, the old rules. I understand, all right, you go to the primaries, you get your guys, and if enough libertarians, small L libertarians, even large L libertarians would shed the large L and join the Republican Party, you'd get the respect I think we deserve.
I'm not sure that. I'm not affiliated with the Libertarian Party. I hate to say it. I'm not a registered independent. I've just never affiliated with any party. But I'm not convinced. I mean, what's in it for me, and have me be the stand-in for that 40% of independents, most of whom go along with a kind of Republican, party platform of saying, government. I mean, there's like a 60% plurality or majority, according to Gallup, that says, government should do fewer things and it should cost less. I mean, this is a popular idea, but then when you get the Republicans to actually talk turkey, it's somebody like Mitt Romney saying, you know what, I can promise you I will never touch Social Security or Medicare. So in other words, we're going to repeal Obamacare, but then we're going to keep in these two behemoth programs that are failures and that are going to bankrupt the nation. So it's like I need more than that to get off the couch to go campaign for Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum, who is rightly against the contraception mandate in Obamacare, but then is actually against contraception. He's against non-marital sex. I don't think that's real. I think if the Clinton administration taught us anything, it's that we don't want the president and sex in the same sentence ever again.
But show me how this works. And that if people are unaffiliated, you call them independent. If they're unaffiliated,
let's call them the Tea Party, because the Tea Party, the power of the Tea Party was precisely that it was not the Republican caucus Tea Party, group and Good Times Review.
But in order for them to have a source of power, they have to get involved in partisan politics.
Well, they did, and so here's an example in Kentucky. Mitch McConnell is the senior senator there, and he did everything that he could to make sure that Rand Paul was not the Republican nominee for the junior seat there. He put up his own guy. He pushed really hard. People rallied around in Kentucky, and from outside, they rallied around Rand Paul. And he was a kind of maverick candidate within the Republican Party, and then he trounced the Democratic candidate. On election night, Rand Paul thanked the Tea Party. He did not thank the Republican Party, which did very little to help him. So that's a way that Tea Party people got involved.
But if those Tea Party people didn't get registered as Republicans and vote for him in the primary, you wouldn't have had that.
Maybe. But what I'm saying, though, is that, well, and this actually leads to another part of the book, where is,
Did you have a book?
Yeah, I think it's called The Declaration of Independence by Jon Caldara.
On Amazon?
Yes, Amazon, Reason.com, you name it. But that one of the goals, and this is a problem with libertarian politics, is the reason why I'm a libertarian and most libertarians are such, is that we hate politics and we want to squeeze it down into the smallest possible box in the house and shove it, up on a shelf in the closet where we don't have to think about it too much. And the problem is that the minute you turn your back, it's doubled or tripled in size. But the way that I think that libertarian-minded people and independents, they can register and make their opinion known and force the parties to do their bidding. And it won't always be on the Republican side, it won't always be on the Democratic side, it won't always be in ways that I prefer. But you can do that in short bursts of attention. That's what happened with the Tea Party in 2010. It remains to be seen how viable and vital they will be in 2012. But one example that is pretty interesting is that a couple weeks ago, my co-author Matt Welch and I talked to Jim DeMint, the senator from South Carolina, who's a very strong social conservative, also a very strong fiscal hawk. Right after the midterm elections, when the Republicans took back the House, he said, you know what, you can't be a fiscal conservative and not be a social conservative. And, libertarians were like, what the, that's just wrong as a description of reality. But we talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he's got a book out, and in this book now, he's saying, you know what, the Republican Party has to start learning more from Ron Paul and the Libertarian wing. We need more Rand Pauls. And that is because, it isn't because the Republican Party got religion. They're being pushed by people who may not even be members of the party to say, if you want to get more votes, if you want to get more senators, you got to start making the right calls without Tea Party people or libertarians necessarily infiltrating the mechanism of the party.
We've been talking about libertarians.
Yeah.
And we made a major mistake. We didn't give a good definition.
Yeah.
Now, I see...
I was trying to snowball that.
Yeah. I look at the Republican Party and I see the traditional tension between social conservatives and fiscal conservatives.
Right.
And it's the constant yin and yang between the two, that you have anti-abortion, prayer in school, anti-gay marriage, social conservatives, and then you have folks who want to squeeze down the behemoth, and they're fiscal conservatives, and they might be liberal on the social issues, but on the 90% of the stuff, which I believe is taxes, regulation, size of debt, they tend to agree. So.
But sadly, they don't. And I mean, this is the
but show me on the Democrat side. Show me the anti-tax Democrats.
But
they don't exist.
They are few and far between. I mean, there's a couple of people like Joe Manchin, a senator from West Virginia, former governor, who's pretty good on some of this stuff. But they're few and far between for sure.
Show me the pro-gun Democrats. There are a few.
Well, actually, there's quite a few in the western states. It's just not an issue in the West.
Show me the property rights. Advocates on the Democrats.
But here's the question. I mean, and particularly at the national level. So, how do you explain the Bush years, the first 6 years of the Bush administration, and then also the last bit where it was a Republican president and his Treasury Secretary who was, they were, just losing it in their pants over a long weekend trying to push through a major restructuring of the American economy for no clear reason. I mean, there was clearly a financial crisis brewing, but they were saying the equivalent of, if we don't pass this bill in 72 hours, we're done. The ATM machines aren't going to be working anymore. That was just, hysterics. And then engineered an illegal auto bailout. There is no reason. We need to stop thinking that the Republican Party are our friends. They can be our allies if we're interested in cutting down debt. George Bush was not interested in debt. Barack Obama is not interested in debt, and those are problems, and that is why the Democratic Party will lose the House, or will not get the House back, and will lose the Senate. But the Republican Party is not any better on that. And by the way, the Democratic Party is not better on social issues. They're terrible on drug issues. They're terrible on civil liberties. The only thing that you can say about Barack Obama is that he's worse when it comes to saying that the president has the right to kill American citizens without going through any kind of judicial review. I mean, he's worse than George Bush on that, and some Democrats are waking up to that.
Let's get back to a definition. Using my model of, we've got these Republicans, because in all honesty, I don't believe libertarianism has a chance under the Democratic header. I just don't see that. Let me go with this. That under the Democratic regime, you might find some good civil liberties. You might find that they're okay with gay marriage. You might find they're to your liking on abortion. But let me tell you, they want an advanced state. They want a federal government that crawls into every crack and crevice. I'm not saying that Republicans are perfect, but for me, there's a huge difference between the two. And if libertarians have any chance of making a political difference, it is going to be forcing Republicans to act like freedom fighters. We're never going to get Democrats to do it. So why would you abandon the Republican Party instead of infiltrating it?
Because I'm not part of the Republican Party, and I think the minute that you sign up and say, hey, you know what, I'm a Republican, do or die, paint me red, buddy, you're going to be taken for granted.
That's an overstatement. That's a straw man.
No, it isn't, because how effective have the libertarians been until, and by libertarian in this context, what we're talking about are fiscal hawks. The fiscal hawks had a major impact on the 2010 midterm elections precisely because they were not Republicans. They were known as the Tea Party, and they brought in people who were not your grandfather's Republican or your father's Republican, even as Rand Paul is Ron Paul's son. This is, it is a fundamental shift, and it has to happen where the Republicans have to understand that if they believe in limited government, a lot of the social con stuff has to go, and a lot of the populist economics that goes along with social con. Somebody like Rick Santorum wants a trade war. He's not a free market guy in any way, shape, or form. Bill Clinton, interestingly, go back just to mix it up, he was a free trade Democrat, and he might have been the last one, which is problematic for the Democratic Party. And I'm not saying, let's split the difference with these, but let's identify the issues that are most important, and then how do you mobilize large blocks of people to affect real change. The Tea Party is doing that in one way. Occupy Wall Street, which I think is already spent, was trying to do that in another way. None of their aims, I think, are worth pursuing, but it's an interesting thing, and they've had an effect on the Democratic Party. So what we're saying in this book is that independent voters, people who are free of tribal loyalties, can often get the major parties to act as their vessels. And that's what we need to be doing, because the Republican Party freaked out when Mitch Daniels, who would have been a great governor of Indiana, would have been a great presidential candidate a couple of years ago, when he said, you know what, we got to sign a truce in the culture wars, because what's important now is getting this debt and spending and tax problems and future burdens under control. Otherwise, there's nothing left to fight about. And he got pilloried by National Review and by a bunch of traditional establishment conservatives.
On your side on this, and we've only got a couple minutes left, but time is on your side in that as fiscal reality comes crashing in, that you just can't print more money, these other issues, the social issues, fall away because the country is about ready to be gobbled up in Deutschmarks.
One hopes, certainly. I mean, and this is, and it's odd when I'm on the, talking to people. I say, one of the best, most optimistic indicators of future change is the fact that we're totally dead broke at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And that will force significant changes and a rescission in the size and scope of government. But we can do better than that, because we can control the process and actually move to a principled, consistent, understandable framework of government that says government should be doing far fewer things, and it should do those more competently. And we do that by devolving as many decisions to the individual, just like we've done in our cultural lives, in our social lives, and our business lives.
I'm just thinking it'd be better to get the libertarians into the system to change and make the Republicans better.
Well, it's happening. It's happening.
All right, maybe we're talking the same thing in two different ways. All right, but you got to buy it, right? You have to buy it, otherwise this poor man, get him a coat. Get him a coat. Declaration of Independence.
Thank you.
Nick, always great. We'll be drinking right after this show. Listen for me on Sunday nights on 6:30 KHOW. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute. We'll see you next week.